Good morning. My name is Elaine Grola, and I'm speaking from Brazil. And I'm going to talk about syntactic constraints in medial double-H questions in child Brazilian Portuguese. So, children acquiring languages such as English, Spanish, French, and Brazilian Portuguese sometimes produce long-distance double-H questions in a non-adult way. So they produce things like, what do you think, what animal runs very fast, or who do you think who was really good? So the languages being acquired don't allow constructions such as these, and we will call them medial questions. In the languages investigated so far, children in the age range from 3 to 6 years have also produced adult-like long-distance double-H questions along with the non-licit ones. So productions like, what do you think kids eat on Halloween, or which animal do you think runs very fast? And it's also important to observe that not all children produce these non-adult questions. So non-target grammar accounts, So previous studies in English, Dutch, Spanish, French, Brazilian Portuguese, you have several studies in these languages. They usually propose non-target grammar accounts, claiming that these structures reflect a stage in the grammars of these children. They would not be performance errors, they would be grammatically licit. And the evidence they use for that is double-H copying and partial double-H movement, that are structures that exist in languages, in adult languages like German, Frisian, Romani, etc. So here, an example from Frisian of double-H copying, where we have the exact same double-H word in both the matrix spec-CP and the embedded spec-CP. And partial double-H movement, where you have an all-purpose double-H word like what in the matrix spec-CP, and the actual double-H word that's being questioned appears in the intermediate spec-CP. The same phenomenon in German, but here we also see with a more complex double-H phrase instead of a double-H word. So the thing is that children, besides producing structures similar to these ones found in adult languages, they also produce things that would be illicit in these adult languages. For example, they produce things like, which animal do you think what really says wolf, wolf, or which mouse do you think who the cat chased? So these cases are not found in adult languages. Also, children accept medial questions in infinitives, and this is not possible, for example, in Hungarian and German, and they also interpret both tensed clauses and infinitives as medial constructions. And data from a pilot study in Brazilian Portuguese, you have kids producing medial questions with specific double-H's in the matrix spec-CP, words like how or where, which is not found in adult languages displaying copy double-H in medial double-H constructions, partial double-H medial constructions. So in this talk, we present a new study which tries to deepen our understanding of these medial constructions in child languages. And in order to do so, we have to look at adult languages like German, where full double-H movement behaves differently from partial double-H movement and double-H copy constructions, because this partial double-H movement and double-H copy are more restricted. They display negative island effects, factive island effects, complex noun phrase, condition islands, and subject islands. So for this talk today, we are going to explore negative islands and factive islands. So here I bring examples of negative islands in German, where you see that the sentence with negation is fine if it doesn't have a double-H copy intermediate position, or if it doesn't have the partial double-H movement, a different word here, right? If you have das, which is the complementizer, the sentence is fine with negation, but the sentence is not fine if you have either double-H copying or partial double-H movement. Factive island, the same phenomenon. if you have affective verb like prove or know, you can have the sentence with das, with the complementizer. But if you have double H copying, or if you have a partial double H movement, the sentences are not possible. So our hypothesis is, if children's medial questions are constrained by the same universal grammar mechanisms that constrains double H copying and partial double H movement in adult languages, they will not produce medial questions in factive and negative context, because these would be islands, right? Somehow blocked by UG. So our experiment, we tested 21 children acquiring Brazilian Portuguese. Their ages were between 4 years, 3 months, and 5 years, 11 months. And the task was an elicited prediction task, where they talked to a puppet who didn't see some stuff, and then they had to ask the puppet for information. We had 3 conditions. The control condition, where long distance double H questions with the verb think were elicited. The negation, where the double H questions had a negation in the matrix clause, and the factive, where the double H questions had a factive verb, the verb saber, which is know in Brazilian Portuguese. There were four questions for each condition, and the conditions were presented in a block. So first, the 4 questions for the control condition, then the 4 questions for the negative condition, and then the last 4 questions for the factive condition. Here I present to you an example. So for the control condition, the experimenter first told a story to the child, and then in order to elicit the question, she would say, we saw that it was the ghost that the fairy hugged, right? But Lilo, which was the puppet, doesn't know that. Let's ask him who he thinks. And then the child would ask, who do you think that the fairy hugged? So this is the standard method for this eliciting this kind of long distance double H questions that we have in the literature. So for the negative island, we would present a story to the child about friends that were, playing outside, and then they become very hungry, and they start saying what they are going to eat, and mainly what's important to us, what they are not going to eat. Also, they would say the ways in which they were going to eat stuff, and also the way they would not eat stuff. So, for example, I would eat mashed bananas, but not chopped bananas, things like that. So, for example, Lola said that she'll eat ants, but she won't eat flies. The clown said that he will eat cookies, but he will not eat bananas. So, the 4 characters would say their preferences. And then the experimenter would say, we saw that the clown will not eat bananas, right? He will eat cookies, but not bananas. But Lilo doesn't know that. So let's ask him what he doesn't think. And so the child was supposed to ask, o que você não acha que o palhaço vai comer? Então, what don't you think that the clown will eat? So here the idea was to have the negation in the matrix clause, similar to what we have in the adult languages that we showed before. For the factive island, then the dynamics changed, and the puppet would say, you have asked me a lot of questions, and I got many of them right. So now I'll tell you a bunch of stuff that I know. For example, I know that someone drove the motorboat. The experimenter then would say, wow, we know that it was Pocoyo who drove the motorboat, right? I wonder if he really knows that. Let's ask him who he knows. So the child say, quem você sabe que dirigiu a lancha? So, who do you know for a fact that drove the motorboat? And then the puppet would say, the monster. And the child would say, wrong. So here it was on purpose that he said the wrong answer. But then the puppet said, okay, I'm wrong this time, but I know the place where the soldier parked his car. So the experimenter would say, we know that it was in front of the house that the soldier parked his car, right? I wonder if he really knows that. Let's ask him where he knows. So the child would ask, onde você sabe que o soldado parou o carro? So where do you know for a fact that the soldier parked the car? So then we would have the 4 questions in this kind of dynamics. So for the results, we had 233 long-distance doublage questions produced, 27 of which were medial questions. 8 children produced these questions, and the rate of medial questions produced is comparable to what has been found in other studies, around 10% of all doublage questions. Here we have our table with the different conditions, and separated by adult-like questions and medial questions. We see that most of the medial questions were actually produced in the effective condition. Chi-square test returned a non-significant p-value, and so we conclude that the production of medial questions was similar in all 3 conditions. So here I provide examples of children's productions considering each condition. So for the control condition, who do you think who hugged the fairy? Or who don't you think who doesn't like ants? Or who do you know who drove the boat? Now I show you by syntactic position, and this is interesting for a reason. So here some of the productions for subject position, here for the control condition, for the negative condition, and for the effective condition, all of them are subject questions. So, quem você acha quem achou a comidinha? Who do you think who found the food? Or, o que você não acha que quem comeu a banana? Things like that. For the adverbs, we have both where and how. So here we have for the control condition, and here we have for the effective condition, the production of identical doublage elements. And for the adverb how, we have for the control condition and for the effective condition. Now, the interesting thing appeared for the object condition because most of the productions for object had the WH in situ rather than in medial position. So, quem você acha que a fada abraçou quem? Who do you think that the fairy hugged who? Or, como você não acha que o de calça azul comeu o quê? So, how don't you think that the guy with the blue pants ate what? Quem você sabe que o Dr. Barata dirigiu o quê? So, who do you know that Dr. Potato drove what? So, these constructions are not computed with the medial questions I presented before. They are a separate case, but there were 8 cases of children's productions of a kind of reduplication that doesn't appear in medial position, but in situ position. And the interesting thing is that there is a restriction in German. In this adult language, partial doublage movement and doublage copies are licensed only at derived positions, but not in situ. So here I bring to you examples of that. So here you have of what in base position and in situ position, and the sentence is bad, but if it is in medial position, the same sentence, then the sentence is okay. This is for doublage copying. Here we have the example with partial doublage movement, where if you leave who here in situ position, the sentence is not good, but if you leave it here in medial position, the sentence is fine. So these preliminary results weaken proposals claiming that children's medial questions are constrained by the same syntactic restrictions operating in adult languages such as German. Because if they were, they would not produce medial questions in negative inflective islands. Our conclusion then is that children's non-adult medial questions are not a reflection of universal grammar and are not due to immature grammatical knowledge. Actually, these constructions are best explained as performance errors. Some recent proposals account for children's medial questions as a reflection of their immature executive functions. And we have here proposals such as mine with Jeff Lids and Adam Litter, where we propose that inhibition control is related to children's medial questions, or Jane Lutkin's study where she attributes that to sentence production mechanisms. So the data I present to you today bring new corroborating evidence from a different linguistic population and from an understudied language to this type of count. So what we're saying here is we now, with this data, have one more piece of evidence against proposals claiming that children's productions are actually guided by universal grammar, that they are licit by their grammar. If they were, we wouldn't expect this kind of construction violating islands. Okay, so here I have some references, and I thank you for your time. Thank you.